Africa-France Summit, a conversation on restitution of cultural heritage in Kenya, a webinar that has been made possible by the National Museums of Kenya, Alliance Francaise, the African Digital Heritage, and our other friends. Now, the goal of this webinar is really to advance the conversation on restitution of cultural heritage debate in Africa and to call on Western nations and other nations that owe Africa a debt of cultural heritage to start taking responsibility of what has been done historically and to give back to Africa what belongs to Africa. So it is an important conversation, and it's not just a regional conversation, it's actually a global conversation. And I think that we would like to build on this. I would like to introduce the panelists for today's discussion. The first person I'd like to introduce is Chao Tayana, who is a digital heritage specialist and a digital humanities scholar. She has a background in computer science and a lifelong passion for history, and her work primarily focuses on application of technology in the preservation, engagement, and dissemination of African heritage and culture. She is the founder of African Digital Heritage, which is an organization which seeks to research, strengthen, and develop the technical capacity of African cultural institutions and sectors quite substantially, not just but also in the UK, working the museum, where she leads digital engagement. So that's Chao, and really a pleasure to have her with us today. The other panelist that will be working with us in this webinar is Juma Ondeng, who studied cultural heritage and international development at the University of East Anglia, UK. He has been involved in museum training programs in the East African region with an emphasis on collections care, exhibitions, museum education, and he is currently working with the National Museums of Kenya in Western Kenya's regional museum, the Kitale Museum, where he is the curator, and he is also a member of the International Inventories program, working on the database of Kenyan collections in museums in the global north. Juma Odeng, welcome to the conversation today. The panelist that we have is Ikal Angele, who is the Turkana. She is a grassroots indigenous rights activist who works towards the participation of indigenous grassroots groups and youth in demanding access, control, and decision-making within their territories. Ikal, an environmental prize winner for 2012 for her environmental justice work to protect Lake Turkana, its ecosystem, and communities. And she's currently a PhD candidate studying a political ecology of land formalization, commodification, and dispossession of Turkana's pastoral commons. She studied public policy in the Department of Political Science at the State University of New York. And really a pleasure to have Ikal with us. She's based in Lodwar, Turkana. The other panelist that we have is Dr. Nancy Ngoa, who is a senior lecturer at Pwani University. She specializes in the Bantu language, especially on the Kenyan coast, that is the Mijikenda languages. She has particular interest in the Mijikenda people and their culture, and is currently documenting the language and culture of the Giriama and the Ribe people on the Kenyan coast. Again, thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us. It's really a pleasure in our conversation today. The final panelist that we have is Gashihi, who is a research scientist at the National Museums of Kenya, Nairobi. She has served different museums, sites, and monuments as a curator, public programs officer. She has a special interest in indigenous medicine and healing practices, environmental conservation, sacred sites, rituals, ritualistic objects, and ethnography. And she's a member of the International Inventories programs team. So again, Jerry Gashehe, it's really nice to have you in the team today, and we're really looking forward to learning a lot from you, all of you, given the immense experience that you have. Now, to open this webinar, I would like to invite Cyril Garaldan, who is the head of Cooperation and Cultural Affairs Department at the Embassy of France in Kenya, and who has made it possible for us to have the webinar. So really welcome to make the welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Kimani, for this introduction. So, there, Professor Kimani, there are panelists from Nairobi, Kitale, Lodwar, and Kilifi, and they're public from Kenya and beyond. Today, we are beginning together a special journey. It is special because it leads towards an unprecedented summit, namely the new Africa-France Summit, which will take place in Montpelier from the 8th to 10th of July this year. Why is this summit such an innovation? As you may know, France and Africa have held common summits since 1973, alternatively in France and Africa. Before this date, those meetings had always gathered heads of state and government, occasionally associating local governments and the private sector. The Africa-France Summit, which was supposed to take place in Bordeaux in June last year, belonged to this category, but the pandemic led to its cancellation. Late last year, our President Emmanuel Macron relaunched the idea to organize an Africa-France Summit, as Africa is clearly, with Europe of course, our main area of interest and partnership. His initiative will consist in gathering the African engaged youth from all over the continent and active in different fields, such as innovation, culture, science, sports, entrepreneurship, for a high-level and unconstrained dialogue between himself and the rising African generation. His aim is to hear the views of the African civil society on the development of the continent, on the common challenges that the world is facing, and on the common initiatives that Africa and France, beyond Europe, can promote. In this context, the role to play. It is one of the leading economies on the continent, a fast-growing middle-income country, and a democratic state. Over the last years, our partnership has developed tremendously in multilateral affairs, development and culture, and more recently in higher education, research, and health. Very significantly, the first bilateral visit of a French head of state to Kenya in 2019, and President Emmanuel Macron could interact with young Kenyans during an exciting and open conversation at Taifa Hall at the University of Nairobi. On heritage and restitution, we open a series of 4 sessions from now to the end of May, involving Kenyan civil society with a focus on engaged youth. The next dialogues will deal with freedom of expression and the digital media, gender equality, and finally, the development of the African creative industry. Many other dialogues will take place on the continent under the guidance of Professor Achille Mbembe, a famous philosopher from Cameroon who is following us today from South Africa and to whom we address a very friendly bonjour. These dialogues in Nairobi represent a continuation of the conversation at Taifa Hall and a preparation for the summit of Montpellier. They are a unique opportunity to express recommendations for the French government on its African and global policies. Hopefully, some of the participants will be able to attend the summit itself, either physically in Montpellier or online if the pandemic still stands in our way. The choice of today's topic, restitutions of African heritage, is not a coincidence. As you may know, President Emmanuel Macron expressed his willingness at the very beginning of his mandate during his visit to Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, to cooperate actively with our African partners in the field of heritage without any taboo. That includes the temporary or definitive restitutions of some pieces, as was recommended in the famous Sarr-Savoy report. A historic law adopted at the end of 2020 allows for the restitution of museum pieces to Benin and Senegal. This topic is actually so important for our relationship with the continent that a special session on heritage and restitutions will take place in Montpellier during the summit, and France wants to involve not only its traditional Francophone partners, but also English-speaking countries such as Kenya. With Professor Kimani Njogu and his panelists, we will hear today leading Kenyan experts on heritage of different backgrounds and counties. We look forward to hearing their views and recommendations, not only on restitutions, but more generally on access to African heritage and cooperation in this field. Asanteni kwakumakinika, sorry.
Asante sana. Thank you so much for this, for those remarks. And it's really nice to know that Professor Chin is in the room. I haven't seen him in the last time we knew him at Yale University. He gave a fun lecture. So welcome, Prof. It's really nice to have you in the room today. So we will actually start from the top. I want to really start with Chao, because Chao trained as a computer scientist, so issues of data are really critical to her. And I think, Chao, if you could share with us, your reflection on how accessible and transparent data is that is related to restitution of cultural heritage, and the challenges that researchers based in Africa have in accessing the data in a transparent way. If you could share that with us, that would really, really be good. How accessible, how transparent is the data that exists?
Thank you very much, Prof, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. My name is Chao, and I'll be speaking mostly to the question of data and restitution. And to answer your question, Prof, on how accessible and transparent restitution data is in Africa, the sad situation is that information is not accessible and it's not transparent, especially online. Now, there's currently very little information available to African practitioners or interested parties and even the general public on the, let's say, the current international status of restitution, or even things like debates, policy, and practice. Now, when we talk about the data that is available, we have, especially online, we find a lot of news articles, a lot of, let's say, academic publications and even documentaries, but even these mostly tend to come from the West, and generally also tend to center a Western perspective. Now, what kind of data are we talking about? Because if you're talking about accessibility, then it's important to ask what kind of data do we want to be made accessible? So this includes information on things like policy and advocacy, the number of completed returns, the pending return requests, and even best practice examples. Now, I think also to speak to the lack of data is to speak to why it is important for data to be accessible. When this data is not accessible, we as African practitioners quite generally are unable to observe the trends or shifts and impacts that are taking place, and also we're not enabled to operate from a place of knowledge or from a place of data and understanding and making data-based decisions. So these are some of the challenges that we are facing, especially with regards to understanding what has happened, because there's also an assumption that if nothing is there, then nothing has happened. While in reality, the situation is that African practitioners have been making requests for a very long time, from Ethiopia to Benin to Kenya. It didn't start 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. This is something that has been ongoing. So the lack of data makes it seem as if we're always starting from scratch, when in reality, this is part of a continuing process and something that has happened before and has been demanded before. In terms of what challenges I think African practitioners face, particularly in being unable to observe data, is it's very hard to find case studies. So for example, if you're starting a restitution process from scratch, where do you begin? Who do you get in touch with? And we know that restitution requests are not just coming from government. Some of them are coming even from private museums or communities. So where do people go when they need information? It also means that we can't form networks, we can't collaborate, we don't know who's doing what, especially if everything is happening behind closed doors. So what we are saying is that the need to make data accessible is really crucial in furthering and catalyzing the restitution debate, in bringing in more people, whether they're specialists or non-specialists, because the idea of critical mass awareness and public awareness of this issue is very crucial. So these are some of the things that a new project that we've started with a colleague of mine who's based in South Africa called Open Restitution Africa. And what we're trying to explore is, can we build a data platform that sort of centralizes this data and makes it accessible, one, to African practitioners, but also from the perspective and the needs and understanding of African practitioners. Yeah. Sorry, Prof, I can't hear you.
Thanks, Chao. Very, very important intervention. I would be interested in knowing, in your view, is there a role for researchers based, in the global north to help us access this data in a transparent manner and a systematic manner for our advocacy work? Do you think they have a role to play, an obligation, a moral responsibility?
I would say definitely yes, and probably Njeri will speak about this when we look at the International Inventories program. But with researchers and practitioners in Europe and in America, we would like even to understand, we don't have much information on provenance records or even how many items are in collections. And I think knowing where to start, it's one thing to know that, let's say, Kenyan objects are away, but which Kenyan objects, how many? There's a lot of quantitative data and unpacking of the information itself that could go a long way in helping African practitioners map out the best restitution routes, but most importantly for European practitioners to make this data accessible and accessible to the people who really need to use it. And I think also to speak to the question of a moral responsibility obligation, I think El Haj Malik, the Senegalese curator and researcher, he speaks about restitution as an opportunity to rebalance and to operate from a point of equilibrium between African researchers and European researchers, that it's not a top-down approach, that we are coming to the table. And I think this opportunity to rebalance relations and speak to the needs that African practitioners have, not what European practitioners think African practitioners need. So I think there's a lot to be done on both ends. Yeah.
Thanks, Chao. Before I transition to Juma, I would like to make a comment that we have focused quite a bit on Europe and the United States, but there is also the Middle East. The contact between Africa and the Middle East is quite significant, and it goes back centuries. And it will be of interest for us to start asking the fundamental question: what belongs to Africa that is located in the Middle East? I think that that next level of conversation is really, really important. Now, Juma, let us take the view that restitution is a basic human right. So we take the view that restitution of cultural heritage is a basic human right, and that Africa needs that right respected by those who hold our collections. Are there particular things in your mind that countries holding those collections ought to do to facilitate this process of restitution? What type of actions in the countries holding, this restitution are required? And would you think that there are certain policy, legislative actions that are needed on the other side? You can make a comment about that, Juma.
Thank you, Prof, and welcome all participants. Now, the beginning point for the holding museums and countries is to acknowledge that atrocities were committed in Africa, because these objects did not just live, they were taken. And So this was atrocity against the African people, some of this intensively during the colonial period. Now, because these were infringement of basic human rights, it's what we expect is unconditional return of these objects to source communities and source countries. Now, we know one of the things that has happened when you look around and engage with these museums, they all hide under certain laws that they are applicable in their countries, and they tend to make these laws also kind of universal and applicable to us as African countries, communities, and institutions. So let's look at some of these museums in the UK, in other countries in Europe. When we are working with IIP as a database, one of the things you realize that the museums tend, in Germany, for example, African collection, just like any other collection, are classified as assets. Not just the museum assets, but assets owned by cities, owned by local authorities, owned by regional governments. And therefore, they tend also to use this as collateral, for example, when negotiating loans with or development support with their federal governments. And so holding those objects then serves their other agenda, especially the economic, which then they tend not to be willing to negotiate their returns. And you realize that when you look at how they classify objects, now they have a monetary value attached to each and every object. And the monetary value tend to be much more than the prices of those objects locally. And also, it doesn't factor in how the objects were purchased. So when you look at a number of things that we need to be done, is that if they consider this as that the atrocities were committed and therefore it was an infringement of basic human rights, they should treat these objects and African communities demanding them the same way Europe and the world treated, for example, the artworks that were looted during the Nazi regime. There was that effort, collective effort, worldwide, where these things were traced, and then there were central collection points, and objects were then returned to their source, the original owners, without attaching any conditionalities to that return. Now, the legislative and policy changes that are required, therefore, is that Europe, and I will appeal to the French government to lead in this, Europe should then work to change those internal policies that attach value to objects, especially those that were acquired problematically, and they should be willing to let go of those objects. Now, the burden of bringing those objects should also be upon those governments, because those objects do not just leave the continent and then fly to their withholding museums. They were taken away. We know through certain processes, whether there were punitive military expeditions, whether there were religious conversions, whether there were imbalanced power relations that made researchers come off. People just donated objects, some of them culturally significant, without really understanding the implications of what they are doing. Now, there's also need for European governments to lead in changes, especially those that govern the ownership of objects in their museums. Now, I'll give an example of the British Museum Act of 1963, which repealed the 1902 Act, British Museum Act. Now, this act then forbids the British Museum from disposing of its holdings, except in small number of special cases. And you see, when you have a law such as that, it's so restrictive that even when the British Museum, for example, if the Board of Trustees approve return of some of these objects, they come up with these terms like long-term loans. So when you receive back your object, but there's a caveat that it has now been loaned back to you, there's literally that you can do. You cannot engage in international loaning, so you cannot also loan that object to another museum if they come to you, because the holding right is still with the with the British Museum. And so such laws are prevalent across the major European museums. And therefore, it's imperative for the French government, as the initiator of this conversation, to lobby other governments across Europe, including the British government, which is not part of EU anymore, but they have there's a European engagement that they can bring rope in the British government to change certain legislation and allow objects that were acquired in problematic manner to come back to Africa.
Thank you very much, Juma. So in your argument is that we should not have any conditionalities attached to the return of that which belongs to Africa. And I think this is an important statement, because if President Macron himself indicated that colonialism itself was a crime against humanity, and most of the stuff that left Africa under colonialism, it therefore means that there is urgency and really the need to do redress on these matters. Now, there is also the burden of proof, which ordinarily is placed on African countries to show how things left the continent. Who should really bear this burden, in your view? And is it necessary for us to start, working in this, proving how the thing left Africa, whether it was looted or taken by researchers or whoever? Is that our responsibility, really?
No, it isn't our responsibility. And my premise is this: we don't have colonial archives. So one of the things that, and I think this debate, as we focus on objects, we should actually also be talking about the colonial archives. Because if an object left, I'll give you an example of, in the Kenyan scenario, of what happened when the Witchcraft Act of 1925 was enacted. Now, it gave the district commissioners then immense powers to confiscate and dispose all the paraphernalia that were associated with witchcraft, in quote, but which basically then was used to think any paraphernalia that was used in traditional African medicinal practices. Now, this burden should be with the holding museums, because they hold on to the all the original acquisition material that they have. They have letters of correspondence between them and whoever institutions to travel across the Mediterranean and Atlantic and the Red Sea to go and find out how these objects left. So I think if we expand this conversation as a human rights conversation, then it is something that those withholding museums should first of all open their archives, let them engage in dialogue with their counterparts in Africa, so that we who are from the source communities can engage with them. They give us all the documents in their possession about how those objects were acquired in the first place. Now, from our side, we have a role to play. We know the cultural significance of this object. We can locate the source communities. We can engage with those communities to tell us how they feel about those objects, and the discussion about where those objects should go, should they come back.
Thank you very much, Juma. Again, we are having a global discussion, and I think that it's a Pan-African discussion. It's for the whole continent, but of course it has ramifications globally, and that it's not just one state. So we have France, we have Britain, we have the Germans, we have the Americans, and so forth and so on. We have all sorts of other countries that they pay up because I think we are now ready to receive that which belongs to us. I'd like us to get now to the question of the International Inventories Program, which is really in the lips of many of us. And to take us through that is Njeri Gashihi, who is a researcher in the program. If you could just share with us what the program is all about, And if you could also share with us some of your provisional findings. What are you seeing as you develop the inventories? Jerry, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, the panelists, my colleagues and participants. Thank you very much for finding time to participate in this very important webinar. My role here is to talk about the International Inventory Program, which is abbreviated as IIP. It is an organized kind of a partnership between different kind of stakeholders with the main aim of looking at restitution and repatriation. And our main start was what Chao was definitely talking about. One of my colleagues here, she talked about the issue of understanding what is out there. So we came together as a group of researchers, a group of artists, a group of activists to think about what it is that is out there and trying to see if we have a way of documenting, as we are saying that documentation is very important. Think about what is out there and how we can be able to have this discussion going and provide for a platform for Kenyans to think and talk about the issues that they think are affecting us as it pertains those objects that are out there. We are a group of, as I said, we are not only alone. We are partners. We'll start with we say charity begins at home. I will start with the National Museums of Kenya. We are a group of researchers, about 4 of us, Juma is one of my colleagues in the project, and we also have 2 other colleagues. Then we also have 2 museums. This is a very important aspect as we are talking about issues of repatriation and issues of transparency. We have the RJM Museum in Cologne. You'll allow me, I can never pronounce those German names, even if I really wanted. Maybe in my next life I'll try. And then the WKN Museum in Frankfurt. Those 2 museums have been very important because one, they have a role of, they definitely have collections that are from Kenya. And they are also willing to talk about this openly. So their transparency and the goodwill that they have shown to us is also very important, a point to learn and understand that this can happen. We can have this conversation openly. As we know, definitely some things may have been taken in the wrong way. I think everything as it was taken at that time, as Juma is talking about, there was power imbalance. So even if something was not taken to me from me by force, and there was no gun at that point, like it was not at gunpoint, we have to think about so many things. There are a lot of power imbalance issues that come around. And then we have now to talk about the museums. I can go now to the other groups that we have. We have the Shift Collective, which is a group of artists, more creative artists from Germany and France. They have been very useful in also giving the artistic interpretation of the issues of absence and what the issues of taking away objects from Kenya would mean. They have a different ways of looking at it, which is very important also, giving it a different angle, a bit away from our own research scientist or curatorial aspects. And then we have the Nest Collective Kenya, which is a group of Kenyan artists who have been very, very useful and key in interpreting and looking at the database and thinking about how we can present the database to the public. We work in collaboration with the Goethe Institute Kenya in Nairobi, and we are funded by the Goethe Institute Excellence Initiative in Germany. And we have an exhibition which is also funded by the German Federal Cultural Foundation. So in overall, that is actually IIP. We work together. We have been working together for the last 3 years, since 2018. We have held a number of conversations. We've done what we call object movement dialogues, giving Kenyans an opportunity to talk about their objects and what they think, just provide that platform so that we do not end up, as Chao was talking about, that it seems as if Kenyans are so comfortable that their objects are being, are held in museums abroad, and we don't seem to be having a voice. But it was very important to have those. We've already held about 6 of them, I think, yes, 6, and we'll be holding more before the project comes to the end. And then we have I think Professor Kimani has told me to talk a little bit about the findings. So you will allow me to talk a little bit about what we've been able to achieve for the period of 3 years. And it is very important because I was with guests in the exhibition last week. And the first question they asked, have you been able to bring one object? Can you show me one object that you've been able to bring? So this is very important. I'm going to just tell you that it is not that easy. We have not been able to bring not even a bid, because as you understand, the conversation talk, we have to have goodwill, we have to keep having this conversation, keep negotiating. We have some of us who feel that maybe they may need to correct their language, as Juma is talking about, returning my thing, returning this sweater that I'm wearing to me and then saying you're giving it to me as a loan. So we understand all these things, and we understand that at the state level, those things would be important. But we also have to continue saying that as Kenyans, this is our stand. We will be very happy to have our objects home. And if a community or individual asks for an object, we will be very happy to support and see how. So we can call it breaking ground. It's not really breaking ground because we are not the first people to be talking about repatriation and restitution. This conversation has been ongoing since the 70s, late 60s, in the 70s, but we may not have any documentation and proof that this has been done. But at least we have reawakened that spirit of what you can even call it a kind of a protest, or like asking and saying, what, we need these objects, we know how you have those objects. But how did we do this? We did not just wake up and point a gun at someone and say, hey, we're asking you to give us or tell us what you have. We began by writing a very polite letter to around 100 museums. We wrote to them and said who we are and what we were intending to do. And then in the letter, we stated and said, we would be very happy if you could tell us if you have any Kenyan objects or artifacts within your collection. And if you have them, we'll be very glad if you shared with us the database that shows these objects. And if possible, can you share with us photographs? And what have we been able to get? It has not been easy, but I think we must say we are inching forward. After writing to about 100 museums, we were able to get responses from about 33 museums as per the time of going to the exhibition. That's about a month ago. And out of those, we are at different levels. I will not lie to you that we are at par with all of them. We have some who are very happy to say we have these objects, and they're even able to share with us the photos of the objects they have. We do have others because of those issues of they could be held by other frameworks or kind of legislation that kind of does not permit them to give us all the information that they have. But out of that, we've been able to collect at least find out that we have about 32,000 objects. That is from those 33 museums. So we are talking of average of about 1,000 objects in every museum. We are relying on what we are calling goodwill, because we are hoping that whatever they are telling us is the absolute truth. And the other thing is that out of that 32,000 objects, we do have our own restrictions. For instance, we are putting, with the exhibition that is ongoing that I'll talk about in a bit, we have been thinking about showing the database to the public as part of what we've been able to achieve. We have all objects represented, but then we have some that we have to block out the information because the museum we are not at a level where we can disclose what those objects are. So we will have a label that says a certain museum name, and it says that's an object, but it will not tell us what object it is. So it is a continuous process. It's something that we are hoping to continue doing and get to a level where we can be able to, make this database, accessible to the public. We are also happy to say that we've been able to do an exhibition, which is a different kind of an exhibition because it's a space that gives Kenyans more space to talk about what they think and what their feelings are about issues of repatriation and about objects. When I go to the space, one thing that I tell every of the guests that I have an opportunity to guide, I tell them that you should at least adopt one object. It is important when you get to that space, think of one object that you really want home and then start fighting the battle for it. Like make it like your project. And this has worked wonders. We have had people coming from communities like the Mar wanting to be very specific and even giving us more information about the objects that we are talking about. So this actually is also a platform. It's an opportunity for us us to even, do more of the stakeholder education and be able to make people more aware of what is out there. The exhibition is ongoing for those who would be interested, those who are in Kenya right now. The exhibition is ongoing. It was supposed to be on until the end of the month, but we've been lucky that we've been given an extension of 1 month. So the exhibition will go on until end of June. So you're kindly invited to attend the exhibition. For those who could be out there, like those in Germany, the exhibition will be in Germany beginning next month up to August, and then it will go to Frankfurt from September. I think I can just go and think about those as our achievements, but I don't know whether Professor Kimani may be having one more question for me, probably.
Not right now. I will come back to you later. At this moment, I would like to shift gears a little bit. But really, thank you so much, Njeri, for that critical input. And as you rightfully indicate, restitution is not just a cultural engagement. It is also a political engagement. It is an economic engagement, especially when we think about the cultural and creative industries and the wealth that is being held out there that actually ought to be located in Africa because of its potentiality. So I want to really thank you for that. I want to bring in Dr. Nancy Ngowa on one particular area because we know that most of these cultural objects have economic significance, but they also have spiritual significance, and they are tied to belief systems. And I want you, Dr. Ngowa, to reflect about a particular case of spirituality that stays imprisoned, as it were, in the West. If you could just talk about the connection between cultural heritage and spirituality, and share with us the case of the Mijikenda and the struggles that they are having currently, trying to get their spirits back to the community. Dr. Ngowa.
Thank you very much, Professor Kimani. I'll start by giving a short background on the Mijikenda and the Vigango. But I just want to say that the Mijikenda are people who believe in one God, one supreme being. They call him Mulungu. And so they pray through the ancestors, but they pray to this supreme God. And they believe that they have to use the ancestors, that is the departed souls, because they are the ones in the spirit form, and therefore they can connect with God. So the human beings cannot go directly to God, but they go through the ancestors. Now, the ancestors are represented by form of structures, which are physical structures which are found in the Mijikenda homes. These structures are the ones that are called Vigango. In singular, it's Kigango. In plural, Vigango. So what are these Vigangos? A Kigango is a wooden carving that has the form of a human being, but with a straight body, and then just a round head. And this is actually a spiritual artifact, or rather call it a spiritual structure, which is put in the homes of the Mijikenda families. So what happens is this this structure is carved after a member of the family passes on. So when a member of the family passes on, the elders go to the forest and they make some rituals, and they get some particular wood, a hard wood, they carve it and they decorate it. Then they bring it in the home in some rituals. They perform rituals, and then this structure is instituted in the home. Now, there is a specific place where these structures are put. The place is called Kigojo. It's like a structure, like a house, but it's an open one, where now we have all the several vigangos for all the souls that have departed. Now, these Mijikenda families believe that the spiritual, or rather the departed soul, are very active in the family. They are living as active members in the family, and they make decisions for the family. That is, they are consulted whenever there is probably a calamity, let's say some famine. These spiritual beings are consulted. Wherever there is even things like marriage, where one wants to give their child to get married, then they have to consult the ancestors. But these vigangos are representing the ancestors. They are put in those homes, so they are representing the ancestors. So actually you can tell how many people have departed in a particular home, because they are all represented there by structures, each representing an individual who has departed. So then, how active are these ancestors? What happens is these vigangos are the ones representing the ancestors, and they are the ones which are consulted, because they are the ones which can be seen, physically seen by the humans. So they are given, every attention as if they are human beings. For example, you can find that a family in the morning, they go and spill some foodstuffs around each kigango. And also, given that the Mijikenda community value palm wine, they also go and pour some palm wine around the vigango. Now, meaning that they are feeding these vigangos. So they take care of them as if they are human beings. And I have to say, I think I will say this, that the structure, that physical structure is like a spirit. That is, there is a spirit there, but physically represented. So, then there are things which happen. I'm talking also from the background of Mijikenda, Agiriama for this case. And there are some of these things I have also witnessed. And what happens is when these vigangos are not treated well, then they can really cause problems in the community. For example, just simple things like when that structure's roof, because it's touched with makoti, when that structure's roof is leaking, for example, that's something very, simple, you can take it. So, but when it is leaking and then one of the kigango gets some rain, or it's rained on, then the member of the family, the older member of the family, may even receive a dream. And this particular dream could be that particular ancestor represented by that kigango comes in the dream, and it shows that he or she is being rained on and shivering, feeling very cold. And that dream becomes persistent until the older members of the community sit down and decide to touch the roof. And once the roof is touched, then everything goes back to normal. So that spiritual significance is very powerful in the Mijikenda language, Mijikenda tribes. So then with this power, I also want to give another example of this power to just to see how significant these vigangos are. Sometimes you may have, for example, a calamity in a family, for example. Okay, probably there is some immoral issue that has happened in the family, And I will say immoral issue, what is regarded immoral, for example, some issue of incest. And you will find that there will be a lot of diseases in that particular community. There will be some tragedy which cannot be explained. So when such a thing happens, then the people again seek or consult the vigangos. Now, when they consult the vigangos, then what happens is either it could be a punishment. So when they consult the vigangos, they have to do some rituals to seek for forgiveness, so that the family can go back to normal. And that will kind of persist until forgiveness is given or granted by God. So there is a very strong attachment, or rather spiritual significance of the Vigango. So we can say this, in conclusion, with my background, we can say the Mijikenda family comprises of the living, the humans that are there, the dead who are very active, and then the unborn. Unborn are also considered as part of the family. Those three, and especially the departed soul or the dead, are very active members of the Mijikenda family. So what are the significance now of these Vigangos? When they are instituted in the homes, they serve as the clergy, because they control the moral issues of families, and also they keep laws. I mean, when the elders want to institute or to get a law followed, then they have to consult the Vigango, so that through the Vigango, the ancestors are consulted, and then finally a particular law is formed, or a particular moral standard is maintained. So, one of the major significance is the clergy, the Vigangos representing the clergy of the Mijikenda family. And then another thing is that when the Vigangos are not respected now, according to the Mijikendas, when the Vigangos are not respected, when the Vigangos are displaced from where they are supposed to be, that is inside that Kigojo, then that means a calamity can befall on this community. And the calamity can range from drought, any form of disaster, diseases, and all that. So once they experience that, they know that there is something wrong that has happened to one of the Vigangos. So with this spiritual significance, I will say that the Vigangos are very, very important to the Mijikenda community. And so they should not be taken away from the Kigojo where they belong. And when they are taken away, then we expect some problem or some calamities befalling the family. Now, I want to talk about the Vigango International.
If you can do it, Dr. If you can just kind of wrap it up so that we can transition. Thank you.
Okay. So I think then from that point, I'm done. It's just that I wanted to mention that there are many challenges that have faced the Vigangos. The Vigangos have been removed from their positions, and that has brought a lot of disaster to the Giriama, or maybe say generally the Mijikenda community. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ngoa. So we are, in essence, you are telling us that many of your community members are in exile. They were exiled, they have been taken away exile, and they are enslaved in the global north, and that they need to come back to the community so that they can provide the continuum that is expected. And you're also telling us essentially that unlike in the global north or in the Western philosophy, where life is seen to be linear, in the Mijikenda it's cyclic, that when our people die, they do not disappear completely. Mm-hmm. They actually continue being active in our lives and in our communities. And that this is a highly critical component of this work. The need, of course, for this harmony, community harmony, by bringing back the Vigango. I'll be coming back to you with a final reflection as we continue. But I really, at this moment, I would like to bring on board Ekal, and also just to make a general comment that for those of you who are asking very particular questions related to the French role, remember, as we said at the beginning, this meeting is part of a prelude to the summit in July, and many of the questions that you are raising will be brought up in the July meeting, and they will be addressed at that time. Right now, we are having this conversation to try and understand the territory, the terrain, and so on, amongst ourselves, and to try and build the body of knowledge around these issues. So, Ekal, I really want to bring you on board because I want to get a sense of archaeology. You know, the Turkana region has undergone a lot of archaeological work over the years. And I'm just wondering the extent to which the community is benefiting from this work, and whether there are particular claims for restitution of cultural heritage that the Turkana community has currently. And just for general information to indicate the location of Turkana, you know, vis-a-vis Nairobi, and what that actually means in terms of the disappearances. Ekal.
Thanks, Prof, and thanks to my fellow panelists. Listening to the rest, I kept asking myself why I'm in this panel. Just because of the wide knowledge that they all have, with, you know, in regards to restitution, cultural heritage, great insights. On regards to Turkana, Turkana is really in the northwestern part of Kenya, at the border of South Sudan, Uganda to one part, Ethiopia, and we border Marsabit County. So when we talk about Turkana, we talk about within the Turkana Basin. Some of the greatest archaeological finds are found not only in Turkana County, but also in Marsabit County. And so the greater basin really is, you know, is home to a lot of the archaeological work, and it transverses into the Omo Basin, into Ethiopia. So and a bit of it into Sudan. The late, you know, Professor Frank was working in areas and would crisscross Sudan, Ethiopia, Turkana, Marsabit, and which showed the extent of work. People like Richard Leakey have been working and have knowledge of both Marsabit, Turkana, South Sudan and Ethiopia just because of that. So there is, and so while most of the discussions were about what's been taken away, what's going on right now in Turkana is archaeological finds, paleontological finds continue to be, research continues to happen here. So there still seems to be a lot of finds here that date to millions of years ago. When I sit with the scientists, I tell them, yeah, the science, I'm more interested in the politics of the science. And I guess that's where my interest has always been in terms of what then happens with the finds. One of the things that we've seen is, yes, it's been great. It's been great to see the interest in research in the region. But one of the key things is, how does it work for communities? Because one of the biggest things, and I agree with what Juma was talking about, economic, the economic impacts. Most communities think that there is, once you get an archaeological find, that you can sell it. I get people bringing for me, you know, bones that have basically been petrified into stone, and they think there's economics that I can buy them. And so it's really it's the lack of the need to invest in the knowledge. So while communities are not directly benefiting, there's a little bit of benefit from jobs. But I think the information, because we all know, Prof, that knowledge becomes an economy, the knowledge economy, and how that knowledge, the power dynamics within the knowledge economy, and how that, when you find it, a lot of like with the Turkana boy, people like Frank Kamoya were recognized for it. How are we going to make sure that the archaeological finds, and there's investments in the local knowledge, and how the local people, the indigenous communities, can benefit from the recognition around this? And is there a benefit to being recognized right now in a time like now, as Kamoya was? Or does it just end up with a tagline and it ends there? Because many people, again, people always attach being known for something to economic gains. I don't know if my video seems to be freezing. Yes, so I will go off video just for a bit because my internet is fluctuating. So the other thing is just to also highlight that, yes, there's been some investment. People like Richard Leakey, Turkana Basin Institute has invested in some education support through scholarships. People like Dr. Manfi have supported communities, but then how does that translate to a more sustainable way? So as much as we talk about restitution into Kenya, we've got to think about, in a devolved system, how are we devolving the benefits away from people only visiting the Kenya National Museum and other centers, to devolving that benefit to the counties or to the places where communities have a claim to this. When listening to Daktari speaking before me and talking about the Mijikenda, if you remove the benefits of the narratives and stories, narrations, oral stories from this place and take it to the museum, then people do not visit this area. And so it's thinking around how is it that the restitution can not only get to the national level, but be devolved to the counties and to the specific communities where this is happening. In Turkana, for example, you have the Lothgam, which is in Kerio, a very remote part of the county. Most people will fly into Lodwar town and not go to Kerio. You have where the Nariokotome, where Richard Leakey put up the Turkana boy statue. And now we've seen a few people go there, but how do we work as various partners, research institutions, Kenya National Museum, government, and communities, to make sure that people within Nariokotome see the value of this? And it may not necessarily be direct economics, but then there's got to be an understanding of how we can build a pipeline of young scientists from the region. And science is not necessarily just, what is taught in school, but how do we link the indigenous knowledge to the science and publish like this? Prof, from your side, especially coming from a cultural space, you understand why it is important not only to take what's out there in terms of science, as was indicated by Njeri in terms of and Chao earlier, in terms of information access out there, but how do we make information that's both indigenous knowledge and the science, be able to cut out that power relations between science and indigenous knowledge, because through that is the time where communities start to embrace it. Because right now, the tension between scientists and researchers working in this region and communities who feel that they don't get value for continues to happen, especially with misinformation, disinformation, and as Alia said, a skewed balance of information to communities, because they think that if you've come in from a different place, you've flown into the region to do research, and you're camping in this place for months, you cannot be just doing it for the sake of for free, especially because most researchers say we don't get paid to do this. But how do we break down that information so that communities see the space of research and the space of traditional knowledge, and how they benefit from that intersection between the archaeological finds, the cultural heritage, and how it informs development going forward?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ikal, for that very important intervention. and the role of communities in the restitution debate. I would like to take us back now to Chao with a particular question. And as you make your comments, I think that we'll be making concluding remarks along the way. So for Chao, I would like you to reflect on some of the practical projects that you are undertaking at the African Digital Heritage. If you could just share, a couple of examples, that would really be helpful. And for Juma, there is a question that has been raised related to the role of government. Because as you know, governments ought to make the claim on behalf of communities. The question then is the extent to which governments in Africa are working to make these things possible, and what level of work can be done, whether it is advocacy for policy and legislation, or even just an awareness raising at the level of leadership to prioritize these issues. And for Njeri, when you step back in, there is, you raised the issue of goodwill, the issue of goodwill, that sometimes we have to depend on the goodwill of people. Now, if someone loots, they have looted your thing, and it's very valuable economically and socially, it gives them a lot of prestige. How do we navigate this goodwill? How do we get someone who has stolen from you to suddenly get this feeling that they need to return? So what level of work is required? I know we've seen the Irish are doing stuff with regard to returning what they took away on the basis of religion and so on. But if you could just address this issue of goodwill and whether goodwill is enough, that would be very, very important. And Ikal, as you conclude, as you make your comments, if you could just again come back the issue of community, and especially where there is this mutual suspicion between researchers and the communities. What level of work is required for communities to be able to make the claims that they have, and what type of strategies do those of us who are in academia as well as in civil society need to adopt to push these things forward, so that we remove the monetary benefit. Well, actually, I don't think we need to remove it. I think that alongside the monetary benefit, to talk about the value of the products to the community, because I'm sure that the communities do understand how valuable these things are. If you can reflect a little bit about that. So, Chao, if you can step back in and give us some examples of what you are doing at ADH. Again, just if you can take 2 minutes, everybody, just 2 minutes, so that we are able to wrap it up. Chao.
Thank you very much, Professor Kimani. Forgive me, my internet is a bit slow, so I'll be off video, and I hope you can hear me. One of the flagship or most recent projects that we've been doing on African Digital Heritage is a collaboration with the Museum of British Colonialism, which is a volunteer initiative founded by myself and 3 other women here in Kenya and the UK to look at ways of communicating and disseminating more truthful and inclusive accounts of the colonial period. Now, we're all volunteers working across different continents, but what I think the beautiful part of this project is the limitations that we had in terms of geography, in terms of funding, in terms of space, really allowed us to expand what we want to tackle. So we primarily use digital media as the primary way of communicating and documenting. One of the things that we've just done is to document and create digital reconstructions of detention camps that were set up in Kenya between 1952 and 1960. We've begun creating digital reconstructions. And in this process of creating digital reconstructions, we're not just relying on archives
books, we're also going back to the communities, looking at the indigenous knowledge which pertains to this period and the human experience of this period. So essentially saying that whether we are working within the physical world or the digital world, it is very important to incorporate different sources of information, but most importantly to prioritize indigenous knowledge. So all this material is available on our website, and I'd be happy to share links after this. But also I'd just like to end by saying and pivot from the other speakers who have so gracefully shared that, you know, restitution is a political issue, it's a cultural issue, it's a spiritual issue, it's an economic issue. And I think the reality for those of us as African practitioners who are working in this space is that it's not just a 9-to-5 job, it's a reality that we encounter in everything we do, in our communities, in our spaces. And opening up data on restitution is not just about the facts and figures. We strongly feel that it's also about understanding and appreciating the complexities of this discussion from an African perspective. And this includes taking note of the emotional labor, the psychological and intellectual labor that goes into this, the bureaucratic relationships that we have to navigate, and the cultural politics, and hope to continue having such forums to spotlight these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chao. I must say that I'm one of your fans in the reconstruction of the detention camps, the digital reconstruction. I really, really admire the work you're doing, and I really want to encourage you to continue doing this work. Yeah. So, Juma, what are your reflections on these questions, man?
Thanks, Prof. My reflection is this, and I'm glad Professor Bungu is in this forum, because in our previous engagement with him, he did highlight one very important fact, that even as we talk about restitution now, it's not a new thing. During the independence struggle in Africa, all the team that led the negotiations factored in restitution and bringing back objects that left during the colonial times. Of course, with independence, the priorities changed, but I think now it's high time that governments now prioritize this, because even when we look at the success stories of objects that have been repatriated, not voluntarily, like the Vigangos, but those that have come back to the continent, they have only been done when governments intervened and made it either a bilateral engagement with the holding institution, or the ministers of those countries took charge and then approached the holding institution on behalf of the communities. And so it's high time. I'm glad during our previous engagement, there was the idea that African Union is prioritizing restitution as part of its agenda. And so this will also give governments, the African governments, more focus in terms of doing this. But governments work with when they are under pressure. And this is the role now where advocacy comes in. If communities are making noises and they're pushing their representative, whether at the county assembly or at the National Assembly and the Senate, then this is going to find them, all the elected representatives, when they take up this, then the governments in charge will also prioritize this and bring in even legislation and policy frameworks that will make restitution be part of African government's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juma, for those remarks. We can never really we can never move away from that responsibility. Njeri, your comment?
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Kimani, and I am also really glad to see that Professor Bungu is here, and I have seen your question, and yeah, I must agree with you that relying on other people to fund us, to take things from them, is absolutely ridiculous. That one I must agree. But then it's a situation of where you have a glass that is empty, or a glass that is half empty, or a glass that is half full. So as IIP, we chose opportunity of looking at it at the glass as half full. because as much as we know that we may not be having any resources from the government right now, of course we have resources because myself and Juma and my colleagues, we are paid by government. We must appreciate that. That NMK, we are public servants, we are paid by Kenyan money. So whatever it is that we are doing is still within what the government expects us to do. They may not have put any money specifically for that role, but we must appreciate that. But then we must say that this support has to go beyond this. And as my colleague has already said, for us to be able to move forward, for us to be able to have more responses and transparency from the museums that we are targeting or institutions, or at times even individuals who are abroad there and who are very powerful and they have objects that we may be in need of. For us to be able to have more public access to the database, and for us to be able to have that inventory being able to be accessible to all public within Kenya, we need more support. For us to be able to carry out further research, and it has been mentioned in this room, that we need not only to focus on Europe and North America, and I agree, we could be having objects in the Middle East or anywhere else, who knows where. We need more resources, and we only need our government to support us in this venture. For us to be able to do more sensitization for the community, we need our government to come in. And for us to go and do provenance research and agree that whatever it is that those objects are indicated to be is what they are. Remember, we may be researchers, but we do not own the knowledge. The knowledge it is with the community. So we need to go out and reach out to this community and even ask for more. And then, of course, for this framework to be established for legislation, for us to be able to have an organized system, we need our government to do much more than it is doing. But then we have a role. We have to keep talking. We have to keep doing what we can. If you're a research scientist, if you're in advocacy, in whatever role you are in, you are called upon to do the little you can do to push this government to do more than it is doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Njeri. Surely there is government, and government must absolutely play a role. And of course, those of us who are doing advocacy work with government and pushing, legislation, whether that's within cultural and creative industries or national policies and legislation on culture and heritage, we are aware of the challenges of that process. But that does not stop us from doing the work that we do. And we need to stay very focused because if we don't stay focused, then whatever we seek to do is not going to be of value. I want to bring in Dr. Nancy Ngowa, because I know I stopped you as you were moving into a particular idea. If you could just use this opportunity now to advance that idea and to give our last comment about the Mijikenda. Nancy. Have we lost Nancy? I don't see her in our space.
We've lost her.
Yeah, we've lost her. Maybe, Carl, you can step in as she tries to reconnect, because you had a brilliant idea about community engagement. If you could just advance that as you make your last comments, Carl.
Thank you. Yeah, so quickly, the issue around mutual suspicion, and at first we thought it's only, different pigmentation, so white people, white researchers, but then we've also seen some Kenyan researchers suffer the same suspicion, because then again, misinformation and worse off, it happened around the time when the oil exploration was happening. So because the oil exploration, again, it's the same sort of research that happens. There's more interest in terms of why are you doing this and why are you taking, but also because Turkana has also, recently found a lot of minerals, whether from gypsum to gold, and other, smaller minerals. So that's created it. And I think one of the things we have to do, I like what Chao was talking about, getting the stories pre-colonial. I'll give an example. Many people say that Kenyatta was held here at Lodwar, yet he really was held in Lokitang. Lodwar was the stopover because the distance between Kapenguria and Turkana was much farther. But there's just not been any effort, whether by the museums, by other research, by anybody, to really bring, create a lot of factual information around this. And just because of such small, this is a simple one because just where he was. So I'm excited about the work that Chao and her team are doing that will be able to bring this out. You know, the stories about the Lake Turkana and what it was called before, who are the people who were there before. So I think just really giving out more information that goes pre-colonial, colonial times, and that will start to create a platform where communities can contribute to that platform, but also feel that they own it and start to appreciate the information they get from the same platform. So I think that's sort of thing to do. But lastly, you know, a lot of work has gone into a lot of the archaeologist researchers are actually getting data that informs us, our identity as pastoralists. And I think what's critical is to find how the discussions around resilience building can be informed by the history of who we are as pastoralists, because a lot of the suggestions given by the INGOs, development aid agencies around resilience, is really in a way of wiping out the identity of pastoralists and pastoralism being seen to be archaic. So I think some of the value that communities can benefit from this is what comes out of the research, our identity as pastoralists, and how our resilience was then and how we can build on that rather than wiping it out. And because it seems to be disconnected in terms of who we are and what the research finds of who we are, and then what is suggested in terms of how we deal with our identity, our livelihood, and our economic value as pastoralists. And I think the space to bring this, you know, knowing where we come from to inform where we are now and build on where we're going, is a very critical way to bring in communities where they feel that their own knowledge, their own narratives are informing the development agenda through their narratives.
Thank you very much, Ikal. Just to mention that I'm in touch with Dr. Nancy Ngoa, and she's lost contact. You see, we are connecting between Nairobi, Kilifi, and Lodwar, and of course, all of us have differing opportunities for connectivity. So really, thank you so much. I would like to make two comments as we wrap up the meeting. And I want to say as follows, that the pillage of cultural heritage over the years has denied the youth of Africa the right to access critical cultural and artistic expression and its social and spiritual significance. And that our young people do not have the advantage, in a sense, of really appreciating the richness, that the African continent has generated over the years. So they are growing completely unaware of the contribution of the continent, whether it is within the area of creativity, imagination, and so on. And that indeed the return of these collections to the continent will give the youth of Africa cultural dignity and confidence. And we now know that the more confident people are, the more engaged they become in economic transformation. You build confidence by giving people points of reference. And therefore, the collections will be critical points of reference for African youth. And that it is urgent and critical that Western governments, as well as African governments, take up this matter rather seriously and urgently. We are aware of the work that is being done in Algeria, with the construction of the Great Museum of Africa. But we think that it's not just that particular museum. We need to have national museums supported by the return of the collections. We also need community museums, which are closer to where the people are. So quite a bit of work that needs to be done. And of course, the recognition that this requires both political will, economic commitment and funding, as well as intellectual collaboration. And to say that Aspiration 5 of the African Agenda 2063 does provide a framework for African governments to really get quite involved. So, just listening to my colleagues, I think that a couple of things have come out which are worth following up. The first one is the need for African governments to be involved very deliberately and urgently in the policy and legislative framework for the return of our products, and that this should be really urgent and immediate, really, for African governments. The other thing that's coming out is that communities are making claims in isolation, and that there's need for coordinated engagement that brings together government at the national and county level, as well as civil society, private sector, scholars, and researchers, that the restitution agenda becomes coordinated at so many different levels, so that you build coherence in terms of messaging. The other critical issue that is coming up is the introduction of research and documentation grants for African students and researchers. I think it is important for the West to put aside money specifically for fellowships, for grants, and for us to be able to do our research really by funding from the West as a responsibility to the scholarship. The thing that's coming out rather urgently is the support of object-specific research and documentation. We need to know more about particular, objects that are out there, and that instead of doing research that is very generalized, we can do generalized research, but we also need to do specific research about particular objects to know their historicity, their significance, and so forth and so on. I think this also came out rather strongly, that there is need to review policies and laws in the North that hinder restitution, that Western countries also must take responsibility of reviewing their policies and laws. We know that that can be slow. We know there are many of those laws out there, but surely we will, and it is possible to come up with omnibus legislation so that every item does not have to be subjected to its particular law for the return. You can do omnibus legislation that of everything that is located in the various countries, and then that provides the framework for restitution. I think that, again, from the panelists, what's coming out is the need to support Pan-African collaboration that is being done in Kenya, needs to be supported alongside work that is being done in Southern Africa, Western Africa, and Northern Africa, and that we work towards a Pan-African collaborative framework, so that is not, this work is not isolated in terms of country. There is need for greater sensitization at the community level, which then means that we have to work again in a very pointed and deliberate way with the media in Africa, so that the media also become partners in this work. And finally, to say that those things that belong to Africa, whether looted or taken out of gifting, because the gifting may have been as a result of imbalance of power, and I think that, or even coercion of some sort. So whether it was looted or gifted, so long as the community is making a claim for the return of that which was taken, it needs to return. And the burden of proof should not be on the communities, it should be on those people who are holding those products. I think this is what is coming out of this very, very exciting conversation. And I really want to thank my colleagues the panelists. I want to thank Chow, I want to thank Njeri, I want to thank Juma, I want to thank Nancy Ngoa, and I want to thank Ikal for really shedding light on these issues. And I also want to recognize Cyril and the French Embassy for the support of making this possible. Now, I have seen a question of where people can access data that is already available. I think that we will be able to, if you see the links that have been shared in the chat, both links for IIP as well as ADH and others, you can follow that and then you'll be able to get the information that, that you require. I'll ask that the panelists remain behind as we wrap up, and I just want to thank everybody for a fantastic discussion today. So thank you very much, and we'll be talking later. This agenda is just beginning. This matter is just on course. So we will be calling on you again to be with us. So panelists, please remain back. I would like to have a chat with you. Thank you so much.